Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, our series featuring Arkansas women who are working to save the state's historic places. This program is generously supported by DMX Architecture of Fayetteville. So many thanks to DMX for their generous support. I have a couple of announcements before I introduce today's speaker. Preserve Arkansas will host another Dollars and Cents of Historic Preservation workshop at Eureka Springs on Friday, August the 26th. We're excited to bring you our keynote speaker, Brianna Grosicki, who is a consultant with Ethos Preservation in Savannah, Georgia, as well as a full-day lineup of great speakers and building tours. Registration is $25 a person and includes light breakfast, a boxed lunch, and programming. More information and registration is available at preservearkansas.org. Preserve Arkansas will celebrate its 40th anniversary at the Hamp Williams Building in Hot Springs on Friday, September the 9th, and you're all invited to attend. We will celebrate the accomplishments from the past 40 years and look to the future with our keynote speaker, Bonnie McDonald, who is President and CEO of Landmarks Illinois. And Bonnie will speak about the Relevancy Project, her quest to make historic preservation more relevant and inclusive. Tickets and sponsorship opportunities for our 40th anniversary celebration are available on our website at preservearkansas.org. And many of you who are watching are already members of Preserve Arkansas, and we thank you for your support. If you are not a member, I'd invite you to join us for as little as $50 a year. Your membership and donations provide vital support to our organization and allow us to continue the work of saving Arkansas's historic places. Join us again for Women in Preservation on September the 13th. We will hear a talk by Ruth O'Laughlin, who is the site director at Lakeport Plantation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Hannah Ratzlaff. Hannah is a historic preservation and design professional with a reverence for special places. Hannah became the urban designer and historic preservation officer for the city of Little Rock in 2021. Previously, she was the exterior design consultant for Main Street, Arkansas. Hannah believes in the unique character of all things, people, and places, and loves to bring this character to its fullest potential. She is fueled by the opportunity to restore what has been lost and to reimagine what could be. Hannah's early interest in history, people, and the built environment led her to a BA in history at John Brown University in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and a postgraduate degree in urban strategies and design at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. In 2020, Hannah, along with her project team, was honored with Preserve Arkansas's Outstanding Achievement in Preservation Education Digital Media Award for the creation of a digital building inventory that doubles as a preservation education and heritage tourism tool. In 2022, she presented the impact of this tool at the Main Street Now conference in Richmond, Virginia. Hannah is staff to the Little Rock Historic District Commission and River Market Design Review Committee. She is the Planning and Development Representative on the Capital Zoning District Commission and Capital Zoning Design Review Committee. She is also a member of Preserve Arkansas and of the Quapaw Quarter Association. Please welcome Hannah Ratzlaff.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to figure out how to share my screen really quick. Is that good with you, Rachel?
Yes, go for it. It's all you.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you, Rachel, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone joining this series. I've learned a lot from watching the other participants or the other speakers present in the past few years, and I'm excited to be one of them. So first, to introduce myself again for repetition's sake, even though Rachel did a fantastic job. My name is Hannah Ratzlaff, and I'm the urban designer and historic district commission staff for the city of Little Rock. Additionally, I am a private preservation consultant practicing outside of Little Rock. The main focus of what I want to share with you all today is just my path to working with historic structures and a few principles that I've learned on the way. I'm fairly fresh to the scene of historic preservation, having worked in the field for about 4 years formally. I'll speak to this later in detail, but I didn't really grasp that historic preservation was a field growing up, or even an option of study until it hit me in the face. If I would have known about this world earlier in my life, I would have been doing this from the start with like 9th grade history projects. So I can say that confidently because of my love of historic structures and the spaces they conjure, has probably been a part of my life most of the time, just unknowingly. It has always made sense to me, but I did not know what to call it, and I wasn't around people who could point to it distinctly. So nevertheless, I made it here, and I want to share with you how preservation crept up on me, because I think it's a strong illustration of why preservation matters and why city design matters. So to get us in the mood, I want to share 2 quotes that encapsulate how I've come to feel about 1, the city, and 2, what historic preservation does for the city. The first quote is by Italo Calvino. You take delight not in a city's 7 or 70 wonders, but in the answer it gives to a question of yours. And the second is by Johanni Palasma. I've got a portion of the quote up here, but I'm actually going to read the whole thing because it is just so good. I confront the city with my body. My legs measure the length of the arcade and the width of the square. My gaze unconsciously projects my body onto the facade of the cathedral, where it roams over the moldings and the contours, sensing the size of the recesses and the projections. My body weight meets the mass of the cathedral door. In my hand grasps the door pull as I enter the dark void beyond. I experience myself in the city, and the city exists through my embodied experience. The city and my body supplement and define each other, and I dwell in the city and the city dwells in me. So if you went to school for architecture, you'll recognize Palasma's The Eyes of the Skin as usually kind of required reading. I did not go to architecture school, but thankfully the book still made it to me from a friend. Okay. So to me, these quotes kind of encapsulate 2 principles that have followed me during my early development and my early career that I want to recognize as strings that have kind of threaded that narrative. The first principle is that of form and function, which are meant to be interdependent. The second is that it is good for us to experience our environment with all of our senses, not just our sight. I found through my life and early career that there is a common sense to special places. When form and function are harmonious and all of our senses are engaged with in some way, a special place exists. And we gather around it and we call it significant. So just from 2 pictures of me, because we have to. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas in 1995. The first 5 or 6 years of my life, we lived in a 1955 kind of brick, small, plain, traditional home close to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, where my mom was earning her double master's in marriage and family counseling and in religious studies. So both my parents are therapists, and they actually met at a psych hospital in the metropolitan area, which was really cute. And if my parents weren't therapists, I likely would have gone into psychology because it's fascinating and it makes sense to me. But because they were therapists, I leaned more towards the psychology of space and architecture, so more environmental psychology. It's kind of an easier subject in a way, but buildings certainly have a life of their own and it can get pretty complicated. During this early time in my childhood, I was very engaged with the world around me. When I asked my mom to describe me for this presentation, she said I was curious and determined, fun and loving, and liked to challenge and to problem solve through play. What she didn't say was that I was also extremely bossy and intrusive. I mean, you see the cute picture of me holding the flower. I'm very intent, and I'm not going to let that flower go. I was just fiercely assertive. That was also part of my personality. I wanted to. I was very tactile, very explorative, very curious, and just very vocal about it. So when we lived in Fort Worth, my parents took me to the botanical gardens, the cultural district, the museums, Overton Park, all over the place. I remember this time as being very tactile, explorative, full of wonder and curiosity, and to me, eternal. But then we moved. In 2001, my family moved to White Oak, Texas for jobs, to get away from the traffic, to be closer to my grandparents, and because our family was growing and my little brother was on the way. So White Oak is a small rural suburb of East Texas, just outside of Longview. Some know that area as the Piney Woods area, others the land of oil derricks and oil horses, others the land of the adolescent home of Matthew McConaughey. White Oak has 3 stoplights still, one long road that goes from the loop to the school, then subdivisions. And this was basically it. White Oak was a town of about 6,000 people when we arrived, and it is a town of about 6,300 people now. It is a very close-knit, adorable, suburban kind of neighborhood with the school at the center. But this was a very new pattern of the built environment for me, and I was very confused how to interact with the space. I grew up later to realize that space was really important to me, and this move just was really confusing. And I remember feeling like, because it was very car-centric, we were always passing things and never interacting with them. There's a lot of features of that environment that made me feel this way. I ended up having a very deep respect for property boundaries, not because I'm Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec, but just because I think it's how far all the buildings were from the streets, and that there was no sidewalks except the one in front of the middle school. And parking lots were always in front of buildings and churches, and everything felt just extremely private. Very few things felt invitational to me in this environment. And strangely, maybe this is in me already, but I became very socially anxious while living there. Other kids thrived in this environment, but honestly, it just really confused me personally. And I felt like I was floating and I couldn't ground myself. And I was, in a way, kind of sensory deprived in comparison to my earliest years. Luckily, there was about 2 structures that broke this spell for me. One of them was the abandoned Shiloh school. The school sits within an unincorporated farming community along Shiloh Road, just above White Oak. The community was established by former slaves of a Texas Democrat legislator after the Civil War. And the community was centered around a one-room school, kind of at the beginning, and in Shiloh Baptist Church. That school grew, and it was built, this one that we see now was built in the 1930s. And the ruins that are found today are for the school building for African-American students. The school closed in about 1949, and the building burned in 1993 when it was used as a chemical storage for a plastics company. So you can kind of see that this community is no longer active, but it still has a relic of its history, and no one in White Oak ever talked about this. I don't think a lot of people knew about it, even though it was right there, but I thought it was amazing that there was this hidden space of material that looked so different than what was surrounding me. And it just kind of, it brought out that inquisitive spirit in me again when I came across this. The other structure was just a field stone wall that was in front of the oldest section of White Oak Independent School District. So you can kind of see it right there, the kind of giraffe rock that we call it sometimes. So I was fascinated by these two relics, not because I knew their history. At the time, I had no idea. I was fascinated because being near them made me feel grounded and solid and less ephemeral. I became someone who was attracted to that feeling as I tried to make sense of the world. And though that was the case naturally to me, I had no idea about historic preservation. This town seemed to be a town that had forgotten its history, or it just didn't tell it well. And a lot of buildings before the 1950s had been demolished and new suburbs were built. So there was just really a lack of touches to the past. But my favorite classes were history and English. So I did try to engage with it there. And I had wonderful teachers throughout my time at the school. But in history, the topic was never buildings. So that kind of escaped me there as well. So the most I interacted with architecture and urban design, and I think a lot of people, maybe my generation, can relate to this, is I played Sims a lot on the family desktop for hours and hours. My parents were sick of it, but I built worlds. So that was the way that I interacted with those ideas. When I did graduate, college was my way out of this environment, and I just ate up every experience elsewhere I could get. So I went to John Brown University in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. I got a Bachelor's of Arts in History with English minor, and I was able to study abroad in Belfast, Ireland, and in Oxford, United Kingdom. And somehow I did make it back to these kind of earlier thoughts, and then ended up writing like an honors thesis on American zoning, because I had been in the UK and in Ireland and was trying to figure out, okay, why does this place feel different? And zoning has a lot to do with that. It was also the time where I was realizing a lot of narratives that I hadn't grown up with, and I labeled it a comfort zone because we all wanted to. It seemed to me there was kind of just homogenous idea that you didn't care if some people existed, but you just didn't want certain types of things to exist near you that you could see. So it just didn't make sense to me. And I wrote a thesis about it. It wasn't that great of a thesis, but it was great for me to learn. I then went on to study at the University of Edinburgh, which I'll talk more about, and I got a postgraduate degree in urban strategies and design. So my time in Siloam Springs at John Brown University was wonderful. It was no surprise when I chose to go to university that I chose my college based on the town it was in. A lot of parents probably wouldn't want to hear that, but that is truly, apart from it all fit with the university otherwise, but when I looked at all the universities I wanted to go to, I chose John Brown because it was in Siloam, and I visited there and I fell in love with it. So when I first took a visit to Siloam Springs, my Gilmore Girls Stars Hollow ideals just came true. I was completely charmed, especially coming from a place that had no downtown and was just a road to school and subdivision and back. So when I moved to Siloam, this is when I really started to regain my senses. I also chose John Brown University because it had a ton of summer abroad programs. I had a bunch of landscape books from Barnes and Nobles growing up of Ireland, and I was frankly obsessed with little stone cottages. I wanted to know everything about the stone building in the middle of the field. I wanted to know what it was like to be in it, what the stone felt like, why I recognized the roof material. because it wasn't asphalt. You know, you don't find asphalt naturally when you're walking around, but you find stones, you find other materials. And I was fascinated that I was seeing buildings that were built of these instead of some sort of nameless compound material. So I was just extremely obsessed with those. And I went to Ireland just to fulfill that ideal, basically. And then when I went there, I was able to put words to the questions that I had been asking for a long time. Everything was a special place to me there. I was just overwhelmed by the amount of textures, just the different ways you could interact with the environment, the different ways that you could go into the city of Belfast and find little nooks and crannies all over the place, and kind of make the city your own, because it was just so, it was that pattern kind of that I longed for. So during that time, I started to feel very, very real. And that experience is like probably what turned my path towards urban design and historic preservation, was being able to experience a place that had been doing it well for a while. After Ireland, a little bit later, I wanted to keep traveling, and I was accepted into the Oxford Study Abroad program with the Scholarship in Christianity and Oxford Research Center. I was meant to go there and study French Revolutionary history, Machiavelli, C.S. Lewis, and a couple other specific topics I had picked. But it was all a front to me just to get to live in Oxford. I spent more time biking around the town and looking at arches and roof lines and stained glass than really doing my studies. But it was completely worth it. Ended up doing fine, and just being able to really experience the city. I did not retain a lot of my studies at the time as far as becoming a historian and remembering dates and narratives, but I did develop an understanding of the city, its hidden places, its alleys, its materials, the way it smelled, the way it sounded at different times of the day, and the path of the sun across it. I got to really observe how space interacted with itself. And I noticed how I behaved differently when I was in it. So in my later studies, buildings did become reference points for my grappling with history, and I was able to really lock in history a lot better and just have that reference point throughout. Some people use wars, some people use leaders or authors. I use buildings and cities. So when I graduated John Brown University a semester early and chose to stay in Shiloh for a bit, I think this was meant to be kind of like a gap year. I moved into the Harrington House, which is on the top right of the screen. It's a large prairie-style home that overlooked downtown. And the attic had been converted into a 2-bedroom apartment. And me and 3 other women made it our home. So we had 2 people living in the bedrooms. The pre-college life where you just want to pay $200 a month for rent. That's what we did. It was amazing. And I kind of made my life into that Stars Hollow ideal. I would get a coffee across the street at Cafe on Broadway in the mornings. I worked as a server and a bartender at 28 Springs, which is at the bottom right. It's a restaurant that was once a Ford dealership, and it was a really amazing rehabilitation project. And I lived my downtown life. And during this time, I found a relief to many of the questions I had been asking while growing up in East Texas. And it finally clicked that I wanted to study cities and their problems. I applied to the University of Edinburgh for their Master's in Urban Strategies and Design. And I think Edinburgh came to mind mostly because I wanted to live in Edinburgh. So I sought out opportunity there. And it worked out well. when I did go to Edinburgh, I was there for about a year and a couple months, and I was just deeply engaged with my studies, more so than I had ever been with previous study. The perfectionist in me escalated. I was totally engaged and just very set to my work. The coursework seemed to address my main questions and challenge me personally because of that. And that year of my life in Edinburgh really carved out the core of who I have become in my career, based on all of that experience and the exposure I got, not just with the city, but with the professors and instructors, and also with the other students that were in the program. So the other students were a wonderful influence. It was a small but eclectic group. It was architects and planners, and I think we had an engineer, we had economists, some business folk, and everyone was a little bit from a different place around the world. China, Sweden, Latvia, London, Palestine, Jordan, Colombia, Saudi Arabia, and Alabama. So yeah, there was two of us from the States, Arkansas and Alabama, and we gave them our Southern accent super hard. It was wonderful. And together we held this group of students. We held the world's kind of imagination and the world's problems concerning cities. We were a very close group. It was fantastic, and we asked each other really hard questions. And we tried to solve these problems while living in this cold and beautiful place. The most impactful academic experience as part of this, and then even in comparison to my other study abroad experiences, was the program's partnership with Medellin Urban Innovation, which is a Colombian-based research entity that our professors were a part of. And we ended up spending 2 weeks in Colombia, in Medellin, specifically, and then other parts as we traveled in and out. And what I learned there was just enormous, way too much for 2 weeks. But what I did realize was that Medellin has an enormous amount of creative problem solving within the city, with private partnerships, with the city's attitude in general. It was just completely different than what I'd seen in other cities in the US, and it was really astounding to me. So, entering the gap of the unknown after graduation, I thought I'd put it off by going to grad school, but no, you end up there anyways. After graduate school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do specifically, except I knew I wanted to go back to Siloam Springs and figure it out. So we all hopefully have a safe place to run back to, and Siloam has just served as mine. And while I was here, I took the time to just make some money because I'd been spending it on my education. Make some money, stop asking the big questions for a little bit, and see what would really satisfy me in life. And during this time, I got a job, strangely, as a pricing manager at J.B. Hunt for their LTL team. And this was different than what I had ever done, but it was a really great experience. It was perfect contrast to academia. It was focused on tasks and systems efficiencies and teamwork and technical skills and customer service, and just getting the job done, and then you get to go home and not think about it and come back and think about it. And that was really good for me at the time. It was a great place to learn stress management too. While doing that, I also ended up starting a freelance project that would kind of be the thing that projected me forward into having an established career in preservation. So as I said, I lived at the Harrington House. When I moved back to Siloam, I knew exactly where I wanted to live, and I got in that house again. It turns out the apartment that we had originally rented became a revolving tenancy of JBU women. So when one left, another one took her spot, and it just, it might still be like that. I'm not sure. But I was the next one to step back in, and it was a totally new group of people. It was great. And I'm kind of proud we've carved out that attic space in Siloam. But my bedroom looked out onto the abandoned Brat Smiley house. What I'm showing you here, built around 1900, Queen Anne, with some transitional colonial revival features. And I had a lot of questions about this house because it was vacant. And I wanted to know why it was vacant, who owned it, how could it be empty when it sat overlooking a very active downtown. At the same time, on the weekends, I wanted to volunteer for Main Street, Siloam Springs, and maybe weasel my way into getting a part-time job. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to get a part-time job at a nonprofit, but that's not usually what happens first. The director at the time, Kelsey Howard, knew my background and asked if I was interested in volunteer work to build an inventory of the buildings downtown and do some research and provide the organization with a kind of like an in-house reference. And I said, hell yes, I do. Because I had done some previous research on this house just out of my pure curiosity, and it was something I love to do. So when doing this research, I found that drive of pure obsession, kind of that flow state you can get into when you love what you're doing, and you kind of start your work and you don't look up for the next 6 hours. That started to happen with me with this project, and it turned on a lot of lights for me, and I was in love. The work I was doing ended up being a bit more work than what Kelsey had originally asked, because I was a little bit of like that Leslie Knope, Parks and Rec, overachiever. You ask for a report, I give you a binder. But we realized that this in-house project could turn into an impactful project for the community as a whole, not just an in-house project. So Main Street Siloam Springs did end up hiring me to finish the work when it got to a grander scale, and the project turned into the Main Street Siloam Springs downtown then and now. I am going to show you. Let's see if this works. I'm assuming everybody can see this. So the downtown then and now is a public interactive digital building inventory and curated archive that allows you to pull time as a slide across the images of historic structures. So for example, the Harrington House, we have an image, a historic image, and we can pull it across to the current image set from the same location and angle. The website tool offers a paragraph of first there's 52 buildings or more in this inventory. So we definitely took it farther than an Excel sheet with this, but you can click on a building and it offers a paragraph of history, which I ended up poring over. I had no idea how much work I was doing, but that I loved it. It's a really great use for people who are just curious about the history of their buildings in downtown. And then it's a wonderful foundation for any sort of preservation advocacy or education initiative you want to do. We also decided to put in for building owners and future investors little green highlights of what economic opportunities are eligible for the structure. So this one's in our qualified opportunity zone. It's tax credit eligible in that it is a contributing structure, and it's located in the National Register District, and also qualifies for Main Street Siloam Springs grant, annual grants. So what we did was we were going to do an Excel sheet, but it turned into something very different. Back to this, okay. And basically became a multifunctional tool for preservation education, advocacy, storytelling, and downtown investment, because you can take this and you can make it so many things. So what we did, or actually in 2021, as Rachel had mentioned earlier, the project did earn Preserve Arkansas's Outstanding Achievement in Preservation Education and Digital Media. And that was kind of my first boost into, oh, I can do this. This is really great. People love history. There's this whole group of people who love history in Arkansas, and I can definitely get a job here, maybe. So later, me and Kelsey did present at Main Street Now at the 2022 conference in Richmond, Virginia. And that was a wonderful experience. So this project ultimately did give me a job. It got me an invitation to apply to work for Main Street Arkansas. In 2019, I moved to Little Rock. I left Shiloh and moved to Little Rock and joined the Main Street Arkansas team as their exterior design consultant. So for the next 2.5 years, I assisted local Main Street programs across the state to improve the assets of their historic commercial core. I worked with property owners and business owners with rehabilitation and preservation design, and as well as some business design solutions. So here's some before and afters, and then some design concepts. And at Main Street Arkansas, I had the joy of putting into practice those two principles I brought up earlier, which was the harmony of form and function and the necessity of engaging the senses. So these are principles I'm, of course, still learning how to integrate into design. And I think good architects and architectural designers spend a majority of their redesign time trying to get these integrated well into what they're proposing. So alongside design work, I had the opportunity to contribute to community and organizational development, which I didn't realize I loved as well. One of the projects I worked on at the tail end of my time with Main Street was the creation of the Main Street Arkansas Coffee Trail. Our staff and several writers for Arkansas Tourism traveled the state to interview and profile about 40 plus locally owned and operated coffee shops in Arkansas downtowns. And the Google map of the trail location is available on the Main Street Arkansas website. The initial purpose of the trail was to provide a resource for Arkansans and tourists to have an authentic coffee experience in Arkansas, to highlight small businesses across the state, and to make it more accessible for folks to find and get to these types of special places. And then last November, I took my current position with the City of Little Rock, which combines perfectly urban design and historic preservation. So in short, I'm going to be a little quick so that we have some Q&A time, but in short, my job now focuses on how to maintain, plan, and support the special places of Little Rock from an urban and neighborhood policy perspective, a planning perspective, and a design perspective. So just some of the things that I do: I review architectural plans, site plans, and products, for applications to the Historic District Commission and compliance with the MacArthur Park design guidelines. I manage staff reports, agendas, minutes, case files, all of that. I write grant applications and manage awarded grants for certified local government and historic preservation fund grants. And I'm staff to the River Market Design Review Committee, and then a representative on capital zoning for their district commission and their design review commission. So I've lived in Little Rock for a little over 3 years now, which I realize is not a lot of time. But there is a surprising number of special places here. Currently, Little Rock has 23 National Register historic districts, and currently one of them is a local ordinance district, MacArthur Park, which falls within the city's preservation ordinances for design review by the Historic District Commission. In addition to historic preservation, which takes up most of my time currently, I also serve as our urban designer, which is a bit of a mix of design and urban planning. So I make recommendations to land use and zoning ordinances. I look at neighborhood action plans with neighborhood associations. I review permits for design overlay districts. And at large, I hopefully and do get to interact with a lot of those questions that I had in grad school about urban issues through policies, design, and plans and redevelopment plans. So lastly, I've just also started a side gig preservation consulting business because I can't stop designing and I want to do it more and I want to travel more around the state and elsewhere. And I miss some of my Main Street projects. So I do provide downtown design and rehabilitation design, historic research and structure reports, and then National Register nominations for individual buildings. I do not work within the city of Little Rock because it's just too conflictive, but anywhere else, I'm there. So just to kind of wrap this all up and bring us back to end of those two principles. At this point in my preservation career, the principles of form and function and the inclusion of senses have come to show me the importance of material sincerity. And by material sincerity, I mean, what it means to me is that these are materials that are what they seem to be, and their function is directly related to their form. So for example, brick masonry versus brick veneer. Not all special places require total material sincerity, but it is to me the first sign of sincerity to the senses. I think it's very important psychologically that we have places that confirm our own reality in the world, places that are human scale, that are constructed in a sense that lets you know where the weight is distributed, and it kind of takes us back to that quote by Palasma. So without it, to me, it's like walking without material sincerity, let's say, especially with contemporary materials. To me, it's like walking through a forest and some of the trees are fake. But they look like trees, but they also don't look like real trees. The trunks and the branches aren't made of wood. The leaves aren't made of cells. The tree isn't moved by the wind and it doesn't breathe. The presence of these trees within a forest of real trees creates kind of a feeling of uncertainty or suspicion. So I think what you find in historic structures that you have a hard time finding in contemporary structures is a level of sincerity to the senses. Many contemporary structures lack common sense to me. There are contemporary structures, modern structures, who their whole point is to not make sense and to challenge that, to challenge reality and your embodiment of things. But there is that space in between where you try to build something important, but you don't take into account common sense. And I think the presence of historic structures grounds us, and their form assures us, and their function is evident and honest, and oftentimes their existence gives us endurance because they've kind of stood the test of time. So when we practice design in cities, what a design looks like on paper, to me, should not be the #1 indication of a good design. And that is something that I'll kind of end on. I really learned that no matter how beautiful the drawing is, when you get it into reality, if you haven't thought about truly how people would interact with it, not just with their sight, but with every part of them, it tends to be very hollow. So that is my presentation. I'm guessing I should stop my screen.
Yes, if you'll stop sharing. Thanks, Hannah. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. You have a couple questions, and I'll invite everyone watching to ask Hannah a question. You've got some time. Bart Stafford asks, what was your favorite preservation project?
Ooh, really good question. Well, typically it probably is anybody who does design, their favorite project is usually one that ends up turning out well and does get finished. I have, since I've only been practicing that with Main Street Arkansas for a couple of years, some of the things that I have designed have not come into fruition, but it is amazing when they do, and you either learn your lesson on them or you realize how much they contribute to what the business owner, the property owner wanted. I'm trying to think of a specific one that I'm super proud of. I should have it in my head. I'm going to think about that. Can I come back to it? Okay.
You can come back to it. That's a hard question to answer for anybody. Bart he also asks, do you know anyone with your background who would be interested in working in the planning department in Hot Springs? Bart, you can't have Hannah.
I don't know a lot of planners right now. I will tell you that the city of Little Rock is down a planner, and we are open to asking for planners. So I don't know if it's something that's going on with the industry in general. I'm guessing. With historic preservation, of course, it's just like there's so few people that end up in this industry that they end up, luckily for me, becoming a bit of prized possession. But then also there's all these cities that really need this consideration. I don't know anybody, but if you're part of the historic preservation professionals group on Facebook, you might put it out there because they tend to get a lot of hits for those.
That's good advice. Thank you. I've got a question for you. Can you talk about the recent moratorium on demolitions in the Central High School Neighborhood Historic District in Little Rock, and also about the proposal for a local ordinance district?
Yes. So one of the recent initiatives that my office, Planning and Development, the City of Little Rock, has taken on is to address the demolition and alterations that are happening within the Central High School Neighborhood Historic District. Longest historic district name I've come across yet, but and this is the neighborhood landscape surrounding the Central High School. As well, it has a 70-year history that predates the school. It is a very established historic district that offers a lot of touchstones to our past. And in recognition of all the demolitions that are happening there for from neglect, from previous histories of disinvestment, a number of things. Lots of absentee property owners in those cities deal with that too. Not just Little Rock, but people who live maybe in California or Florida own a building in Little Rock and have nothing to do with it, but also don't want to sell it. So the community is just left with it. So to address some of that, and I think there have been initiatives in the past for this, was to make it another local ordinance district. So the city of Little Rock only has one, which is MacArthur Park, and it has put forth a proposal to bring on Central High as another local ordinance district, which means properties in that area would be reviewed by the Little Rock Historic District Commission, and the residents there would be provided with a public hearing and would participate in the construction of the design guidelines for the district. So that is what we're in the middle of that initiative, and the moratorium was passed, the 6-month moratorium to address possible permit rushes to make changes to structures in anticipation of the local ordinance district being passed. So we thought that we kind of thought ahead on that one. But we are working with property owners who are doing historic tax credit projects, who have maintenance issues. So it's not a black and white moratorium.
Some of that brings up another question in my mind. If a local ordinance district is not realistic for a particular municipality, what are things that cities can do? What are the tools they can use to help with these issues of absentee property ownership and things just kind of being demolished by neglect and people won't sell?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to that is kind of the what do people call it? The like golden bullet. I forget my phrases sometimes. Silver bullet? Is it the silver bullet? Anyways,
Not the silver bullet. Yeah.
What a lot of cities do when they don't have preservation ordinance, but kind of American zoning is well established. They will create like a design overlay district to address at least infill design and any sort of major alterations. So the city of Little Rock has a couple of those. I think Siloam Springs does with their downtown because they don't have a local ordinance district, and that functions pretty well for them at that scale. And I'm pretty sure that other districts around Arkansas also have local or design overlay districts in their downtown if they don't have local ordinance districts. Concerning absentee property owners and demolitions, that's a big issue that I'm learning about legally, like the legal issues of that and what cities can and can't do in the state of Arkansas. And it is something that I think our commission right now is grappling with, trying to figure out how can we stop this from happening. And it's a big issue.
It is, and we struggle with it all over the state. Okay, Graham Whitsitt has a question for you. Do you have any projects at home that you would like to do to bring some of your expertise home after hours, or do you have any renderings, or do you do renderings for fun?
Yeah, I definitely do renderings for fun. That so we have some kind of unused gas stations around Little Rock, because I don't want to, do private work in Little Rock when I'm going to be reviewing the project later. Like it just should not happen. But do I want to have fun with my imagination in certain parts of the city when I want to? Yes. So we have a couple unused gas stations that I think maybe in MacArthur Park and in Governor's Mansion area that I'm just want to be dreamy with and make them into little cafes and make them the cute little icebox gas stations again and reactivate them. So when I do things on the side for fun, when I don't have projects at work and after work with private consulting, then those are the things that I like to tackle.
You mentioned, I think the last time I saw you, that you had a big consulting project you were working on out of state. Is that a top secret?
Yeah, I think so. I did ask the property owner if I could chat about it for a bit or even post some things on social media because I love it. But because they're in the middle of purchasing the property and it's kind of a bigger property, they want their personal space with that, and I think that it's a great boundary to set when everything is overwhelming. So some other time.
Well, we'll hear about it later, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. You had a nice comment from Vanessa McEwen saying that she enjoyed your talk. So this is the last call. Oh, Paula Marinoni is raising her hand. Paula, will you type your question in the Q&A or in the chat, please, if you meant to do that? We'll give Paula just a second to see if she types something in. There we go. Oh, Ryan Biles, great talk today.
Thank you.
So we'll give up Paula. Can you put her contact info on the screen again? Yes. Hannah, will you just put you want to share your screen with your the slide that had your contact info, or type it in the chat, whichever one is easiest for you to do.
I don't remember if I have a screen with my contact information. That is a huge, I missed out on that. Okay.
Well, you can type it in the chat.
Okay, I will type it
if you want to. Or Paula, I can share that with you after the fact as well.
I'm putting my Little Rock one in here, just my email.
Okay.
And then we'll go ahead and do consulting. Y'all are going to learn my middle initial. I'm not creative with my email addresses.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. Well, I'll ask one more question. I'll give people a little bit of opportunity to take down your contact info. What advice would you give to someone who was looking at purchasing a historic property in Little Rock?
Yes, a lot of things. From listening to a lot of these talks, I realized that different people have different specialties of practice, right? And if you talk to someone like Amber Jones, like she's going to come straight in with tax credits, and as she should. I think for purchasing a historic property, there's so many different districts in Little Rock. Of course, finding a historic property that is a contributing structure to the district so that you can participate in the economic support that's there is wonderful. Talking with someone like me to find a structure that could be on the could be taken from non-contributing to contributing. I think it really boils down to what is drawing you to a historic property, so you could figure out the one that that kind of best meets that ideal. Because it seems like, and I've not personally purchased a historic property on my own and rehabilitated it, it is a huge relationship to have with a building, and it is a lot of effort and takes a lot of time, and it's super rewarding. But you do want to make sure that you have your list of what you're looking for, and that is what you end up finding. I think being aware of all the incentives and all of the resources that you have is really important. We do have a list of resources at our office. I know the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program has a really great list of state and federal resources, but also, and Rachel, I'm sure you would advocate the same, the getting in touch with the QQA and Preserve Arkansas if you're in the Quapaw Quarter area, because those are going to be your nonprofit folks who can connect you with the right people to work with too. So,
good answer. Yes, I would agree. And in Little Rock, you've got, like you showed some of the maps with the historic districts, but you know, every city should have that, in my opinion, and have it easily accessible to their residents so they can search and see where National Register listed properties are located, where these district boundaries are. But in Little Rock, especially when you've got so many properties within historic district boundaries, that's very helpful. And just, you know, having staff person like you to be able to call up and say, Hannah, is my property in a district? But we're also a resource too.
You can also, the City of Little Rock has a good web application webpage. It's maps.littlerock.gov, and you can look at maps anywhere from zoning to financial incentives to historic districts, kind of all over the place, economic incentives. So that's a really great place to start if you're looking in Little Rock, is what regulations apply. And then what opportunities are there? So that is a tool, and I can put that in the chat too, that Little Rock does have to make that knowledge accessible.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see, oh wait, oh, that's you. That's you in the chat. Okay, well, thank you so much, Hannah. I really enjoyed your program.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. And for all of you watching, join us next month on September 13th to hear Ruth O'Laughlin from Lakeport Plantation. Bye, everybody. Thank you.